My guest this week on Better Than Yesterday is Kylea Tink. She's the former CEO of the McGrath Foundation and most recently was the CEO of Camp Quality. However, before those roles, worked at the very highest levels of communications consultancy, essentially working with governments on their communications strategies all around the world. That job took her to many places, including to the Pentagon, where she famously went toe-to-toe, face-to-face with Donald Rumsfeld when she questioned him on his justification for the US invasion into Iraq not long after there were boots on the ground there. It's an incredible story, and I can't wait for you to hear it. That's just one of the absolutely ass-kicking stories that are on this show today, including one where she describes an interaction she had with Peter Dutton while she was the CEO of the McGrath Foundation. And if you look closer, you'll see me just kind of squirming with glee as she's telling me this tale. But it's absolutely brilliant because it shows that you may be an independent member, but you don't bring a knife to a gunfight. She's clearly got all of the tools she needs to more than hold her ground in the Houses of Parliament here in Australia. Now, I'm stoked to have Kylea on the podcast today, even though I can't actually vote for her. She sits in another federal seat, and I can't vote for that seat. But she is one of a number of women who are all running as independents in this upcoming federal election. And there is a bit of a common thread with these women. They're all very successful. They have all got extensive, high-level, world-class experience at the highest reaches of private enterprise and government policy. And they're, I guess, kind of running on broadly common platforms of accountability of our leaders, science-based policy around climate change, and a generally economically conservative but socially progressive. Kylea is running up against the incumbent coalition member as the independent candidate for North Sydney. Now, you may not be able to vote for her in your electorate. I can't vote for her. But if what she's talking about does resonate with you, look at your electorate. Reach out to your MP. Let them know that your vote is conditional. Your vote's conditional if they meet certain criteria around whatever that is important to you. If your local federal member is, say, from a party that demands their members vote along party lines, I know what that's like, your local member may go, oh, yes, this is a fantastically ambitious climate reduction target. That'd be brilliant. But when it comes time to actually vote, they vote exactly the same as someone who's looking forward to a career in the fossil fuel industry once their political life is over. And for me, that's not okay. So I would never tell you who to vote for, but I'm just telling you how I feel, and that I guess voting for someone who's thinking about 30, 40, 50, 80 years from now has probably never been more important in your or my lifetime. And this is it. I'm stoked that Kylie's on the show today, and I would ask you to consider to perhaps use this conversation to hear what a truly independent candidate sounds like when they speak about policy that is inclusive of all the people of our country, not just the people who sit in their tightly held seats that get car parks or whatever funding malarkey is going on. If you would like to hear more independent candidates, you can listen to my conversations with Helen Haynes, the member for Indi, or Zali Stegel, who's the member for Warringah. They are in the podcast feed. Just scroll on back and you can listen to them. However, for now, please enjoy getting to know the absolutely brilliant Kylea Tink. Nice to see you. Thank you.
Lovely to see you.
I know you're very busy, so thank you for taking the time to talk to me today. Grateful that I can speak to you because, Kylea, I guess I don't think I didn't do very well in high school, and I did some after-school education, but I think I fit into the rest of the country of I kind of have an idea about politics. But I've definitely noticed that you are one of a cohort of powerful, successful, incredibly smart, driven, economically conservative, socially progressive women running independently in this election. And I'm fascinated that there's so many. There's, someone up in Toowoomba, someone here in my electorate, yourself, there's a few around the country. And I think it's, A, brilliant, and B, I'm just kind of wanting to kind of get stuck in and kind of dig into why now, which is really interesting because this is a really important election. They say that every time, but this one's really important. Where are you right now, Kylie?
In terms of physically, I'm actually in my office in Crow's Nest in North Sydney, in the electorate of North Sydney. So we got premises just before Christmas.
Wow.
So it made it feel really real once we had somewhere to call home for the campaign.
So as someone that grew up in Brisbane, before I moved to Sydney, Crow's Nest was just a place that you sent your funniest home videos VHS to. I had no idea it was an actual place.
Considering I grew up in a small country town called Coonabarabran out in northwest New South Wales, I think my impression of that was pretty much the same, to be honest, Osher. Yeah. It was all about the Saturday morning, cartoons and hoping that you could get a letter read out loud one weekend.
That's right. Kids were talking about a time when you would watch television to get your youth content, and then you would write a letter. You would put pen to paper, put it in another piece of folded up paper, pop it in a metal box somewhere in your suburb. Someone would then pick that up, put it in a van, drive it across the country and give it to the person on TV. Now we can just tweet Sophie Lee. I don't know where Sophie Lee is, but now we... Wow, Coonabarabran. Now, that's a very different city these days. I've been through it not too long ago. It is like apparently where all of the warehouses and trucks in the world live.
I think so. It's interesting. Coonabarabran. So I was born and bred in Coonabarabran, and my mum and dad are still out there. So Coonabarabran, for people who don't know, it's about 6 hours northwest of Sydney. So you head out in New South Wales towards Dubbo, and somewhere between Dubbo and Tamworth and Moree, you'll find Coonabarabran. It's a population of 3,001, I understand, from the last census, which actually was cause for much celebration because for the last 50 years it's been 3,000 and it's finally grown by one. But it's actually an amazing community, because it's a very resilient community. I think for me, my parents were really young when I was born. So my mum was only 17, 18 and my dad, was only 21. And I think from a very, very early age, what I learnt was that if something was broken and needed to be fixed, or if something needed to get done in the community, the fastest way to get it done was just to step up and do it, and to work with others around you. So while it's a small town, it actually bats well above its weight for the things that it's achieved. It was one of the first towns to have proper tennis courts that weren't just dirt or grass out west. It has had an amazing academic track record with little Coonabarabran, infant school, primary school and high school. They do really well every year. And, it's really been a town that has literally survived through the droughts and fires and just keeps kind of getting back up and pulling itself into being. So, I left Coonabarabran when I was 18 because I needed to leave to go to university. But even though I was only there for the first 18 years of my life, I think it's fundamentally informed who I am as a person.
I think you've got kids, I've got kids, you can tell. Like the first 5 years is really, that writes the source code. That's the OS. And it's very hard. You either get born Mac or PC, and it's very hard to change systems later in life because all that stuff is written before the age of 5. So, of course, you're forever touched by that sense of get it done, do it yourself, get together, find someone who can help. There's no one else around. Superman's not coming, we better do it. And that's a really great quality to have to instill in your children and to then kind of leave. When you got out of Coonabarabran, what big smoke did you head to and what was that like?
Yeah, so actually, I guess finishing high school for me was the first big zag in my life, and it probably has then gone on to set up what the last 30 years of my life has been like. You know, the opportunities come into my life, Osher, and I tend to step into them because I feel like it's the right thing to do, but it may not have been what I'd planned. So the plan when I finished high school was to come to Sydney and study commerce law at Sydney University. I was all lined up to flat share with friends. It was all, you know, locked and loaded. And I had the opportunity to do an exchange program to Scandinavia between high school and starting university. So, you know, I got loaded onto this plane from this small country town, flew 38 hours to literally the other side of the world and landed, and nobody spoke English.
Yeah.
So I really went from one extreme to the other. And I think what it did, though, was it just blew my mind in terms of a human being's capacity to reinvent yourself and be, you know, there's no definition of who you are if you show up somewhere completely new. So I had this amazing experience for 3 months overseas. And when I came back with this attitude that, no, I was ready to keep pushing myself that way. And I didn't just want to go back to being the Kylie that had grown up in Coonabarabra and living with her friends in Sydney. So I shocked my family, ditched Sydney Uni, moved to Canberra, which I'd never been to before, to study down there. And, you know, I think from there, it really just, life just got bigger and bigger for me.
Can I ask what part of Scandinavia you ended up in?
A place called Finland.
Okay, so Finland's a very interesting place. It's and I'm guessing this is kind of mid-90s that you ended up there?
Oh, you are very kind. It was actually 88, 89.
So still very dangerously close to Russia. And people were very like, the whole Soviet Union's falling to bits. They might do something in desperation. So it would have been pretty intense. Tell me about when you got to Finland, like a completely different environment. Snow, freezing, cold, more clothes you've ever worn in your life at one time. No one speaks a word of English. You look like them, so they're all talking to you like, how come you don't understand me? Government social policy, when you got up close, how much was your mind blown by the role of government and society there?
Well, I think to your point, Osher, it was just so different from anything I had ever experienced. And, you know, in that era, there was still a very heightened sense of not just fear, but actually injustice directed towards what was then called the USSR, because as far as the Finns were concerned, and I think it is still the case today, you know, Russia had moved in. When you look at Finland on a map, it used to be shaped like a woman. So it has a head with 2 arms and then a skirt on the bottom of it. But the Russians actually moved in and took one of her arms. So they invaded, occupied, and still maintain it today. And for me, when I was there was lots of talk about the fact that there was this, you know, this massive crime had been committed against the people of Finland. So they have compulsory military service over there. You know, when you finish high school, I don't know if they still do, but when I was there, when you finished high school, you had to go and give 12 months to military service. Very structured, you know, high quality living, because everything was basically provided. You know, you had a baby. When you were pregnant, you used to receive, and this is going to sound like nothing to people today, but there was this $400 box of stuff would show up at the front door, you know, for a family. And when they opened the box, it would be the pram, the cot, a year's supply worth of nappies, you know, everything you could possibly need to raise that child was delivered to you. And then you were told there'd be care. There were carers coming to your home. It's a much more, as you said, socialist-driven, socially driven
What I love about
community.
the box story, and I've this is often brought up in the work that I've done, you know, the aforementioned post-high school work that I've done over in Amsterdam. I did some business school work over there. The box, as far as social policy, the Finland baby box is often brought up because, yes, it's this government-provided cardboard box. And yes, it has everything that you think are on your shopping list, and people don't have to worry about it because, like, it just comes up. But it's also this great leveler because the box, well, guess what it's the perfect size for? It doubles as a crib. And there's these, I saw this whole, you know, someone was presenting a pitch deck on this social policy. And there's this whole pitch deck of all these pictures of little babies from socioeconomic backgrounds of people who are maybe on the lower socioeconomic spectrum and people who are like, we take private jets to where we're going to go for holidays. every one of their babies spent their first 3 or 4 months in this box. So there was no division. Every little kid in Finland for decades has spent the first 12, 16 weeks of their life sleeping in a box, no matter how much money your parents make. And it's this amazing kind of equalizer, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I think, you know, as you sort of touched on, I do look, you know, like I could be Scandinavian. I'm blonde, blue-eyed. I'm 6 foot tall. You know, it would be lovely for me to find out actually that I have heritage with the Vikings. My mother did tell me recently actually that the guy who plays Ragnar in the Vikings, he's actually like my mother's second cousin. We've worked out he's a pattern. So, you know, but I think that was the other thing I experienced was Finnish is like no language you've ever heard. It sounds like birds tweeting. So while I think you can probably land in somewhere like Italy or France or Spain and kind of half muff through a conversation, in Finnish, nothing made sense. And exactly as you said, people would walk up to me at a bar and start talking to me, and I knew enough to turn around and kind of go, excuse me, or, you know, pardon me, and then I'd realise they had no idea I wasn't Finnish, and I'd have to go, no, really, I'm not Finnish. I only speak English. And then, of course, people would be going, oh, you're so rude. You know, like, why don't you want to talk to me now? I'm like, oh. But it's definitely changed since then. You know, I say they don't speak English, but they spoke Swedish, they spoke Russian. You know, most of them were quad.
Well, yeah, but that all comes from, you know, where you grow up. If we grew up speaking different languages, different people when we were little, as we talked earlier, when we were really young, our brain just absorbs it differently. When you came back to Australia, what was it particularly about your Finnish experience that went, no, commerce is not it? Policy, government, Canberra, that's got to be it. What was it that drove you that direction?
Well, actually, to be honest, the reason I went to Canberra is because I had only ever been there once before in my life, and nobody that I knew from school was going there. So it was, for me, it was more about the fact that, it was fresh space to go and kind of continue to explore what it meant to be me, you know. And so I did, when I transferred to ANU, I got into the commerce part of the commerce law. They couldn't fit me into the commerce law. So I started in commerce, moved onto campus, and proceeded to have just the best year of my life. I had so much fun and met so many incredible people, which was great for me socially. But academically, I got to the end of my first year and I failed 3 out of 4 subjects.
Not an uncommon story, and it's okay. It's important that kids understand. It's fine. It's often the case.
Yeah. Well, and I think, you know, it's interesting because for me, it became really evident really quickly when I started studying that commerce wasn't going to be the direction for me. You know, I remember sitting in an economics lecture and the professor spending all this time teaching us about this thing called Keynesian theory. Keynesian theory, right. And literally it was 4 lectures or something, and I was very, very diligently studying. And then we got to the end of it and he basically said, now you can forget all that because it doesn't work. And I was like, what am I doing here? You know, like, and so perhaps not surprisingly, at the end of my first year, I got invited to appear in front of the academic board to make an argument as to why I should be allowed to remain in university. And I was away on holidays in a place called Lennox Head up on the North Coast with my grandmother. So my grandmother's played a massive part in my life growing up because my parents were so young. But anyway, I was talking to my gran about the fact that I'd basically been expelled from uni and I didn't know what to do. And God bless her, she turned to me and she said, I don't know why you're wasting your time in accountancy. Like, this was the 80s and 90s. Everybody was trying to get into commerce and make money. And she turned to me and she said, I think you should go into public relations. And I was like, really? And she said, yeah. And I said, well, why? And she said, because you love talking to people and you love listening to people. I think you should do public relations. And so even though I still appeared in front of the academic board at ANU, I reached out to what was then the University of Canberra, spoke to their head of the communications school there, and basically begged my way into the course that was the communications course. And the guy at the time, a guy called Malcolm Bodley, took my call and said, no, you can't come. We're oversubscribed. We're too full. And then, mind you, I'm making the call from a phone booth in Lennox Head. So I'm feeding the coins. And then at the end of the conversation, he goes, you know what? He said, you've got one shot. write something for me, post it to me, I'll read it, call me at the same time in 7 days' time from this phone box, and I'll let you know whether you're in or not. And so I wrote the story of my grandmother and the role that these strong women had had in my life, sent it to Malcolm, called him 7 days later, and he picked up the phone, bang on the dot, and said, Kylie. And this is, again, before caller ID. And I was like, yes. And he said, right, be in my lecture theatre front row on this date, and if you miss a single lecture, I will hunt you down. So I ended up transferring to communications, and my grandmother, she picked it for me. The irony to that whole story, Osher, is to the day she passed away, my grandmother actually didn't understand what I did, because I used to write media releases and press releases to get them into the paper, and I'd tell my grandmother what I was working on. And every single time she'd call me the morning after the paper was published and go, Kylie, some other person's taken your story and put their name to it. This is wrong. Kylie, you have to call them and get it retracted.
Welcome to the world of journalism, Nan. They've got 4 articles to get out by the end of the day and they don't have time to write it. They'll copy and paste 8 paras, put their byline on it and go to lunch. That's it.
Yeah, but somehow this woman who, even though she didn't really understand what it was that she was telling me what to do, she did direct me into, what has gone on to be the basis of everything I've done since, which is, a grounding in communication.
That's marvellous. There's people may know your name because of your work with the McGrath Foundation. How did, obviously now it's a huge, very, very visible part of the Australian summer, is the big pink day at the cricket. How did your journey with the McGrath Foundation begin?
Yeah, again, this is another zag in my life. So I was working for the largest privately owned international public relations firm in the world, a firm called Edelman, and I'd started with them as a junior consultant with another company actually that they had acquired. But let's say I'd started as a junior in must have been 96.
Can I just interrupt you? It's fine if you just let the microphone hang. It's it's fine. You're totally fine. I don't want you to be bothered by holding it. It's okay.
Good, thanks, Osher. So I started in that profession in 96, and by the time I got to 4 years later, I was the head of a practice for that consulting firm. 4 years later, I was the managing director for their Sydney office. 4 years later, I was in their Asia Pacific team and part of the global management team for Edelman. And part of what I'd done in that last couple of years working with Edelman has been part of a global project looking at how we would approach corporate social responsibility, which was a sort of an emerging area of corporate, capacity in the early 2000s. And one of the agreements we'd come up to was that every market would take on board an appropriate number of charities that they would provide pro bono support for. So here in Australia, because I was running the operations, we took on 2. We took on the Barbados Foundation, and then we took on the McGrath Foundation, because Jane had launched it in 2005 off the back of her breast cancer experience. So from 2005 through till 2007, we provided basic PR pro bono support for them. Fast forward to 2008 then, and actually I'd resigned from my role at Edelman in Australia, and I was on the way moving to either Singapore or New York. Our family was packing up our house and staying with the company, but actually going into a global role. I had come to the end of my maternity leave for my 3rd child, so I have a son who's 19, a daughter who's 17, and another one who's just turned 14. And I was still on mat leave when Jane passed away. So Jane passed away in the June of 2008. We knew she'd been unwell. I had conversations with the foundation after I'd finished up with Edelman where they'd actually asked me to come on board. But I'd never aspired to work in the not-for-profit space. I was really happy in the commercial environment, doing incredible things, having amazing experiences, arguments with people like Condoleezza Rice as Chief of Staff, heated conversations with Donald Rumsfeld in the Pentagon about why Australia... Well, with Donald Rumsfeld, it was about how had we ended up going into the Middle East. And the questions I'd asked him, it was in a private meeting with myself and 4 other of our country heads. And, this was at the stage where we were starting to go, well, where are these weapons of mass destruction that you've told us are there? And I asked him a couple of questions and he just looked at me and he's like, you have to be from Australia. I was like, why? And he said, well, only an Australian would ask these questions of me. You're being very direct, very blunt.
Wait. Okay. I really want to get to the, and it's really important because I know you have a very personal connection with Jane McGrath
Yes.
and her end of life and how you began with that. But I cannot let this moment go by because you're running as an independent candidate. People may have an idea about the experience level of an independent candidate, or it's someone from just an average person who's just decided I'm going to have a run. Wait a second. You are in a room with Donald fucking Rumsfeld at the height of, Australia's already committed troops. We've probably already lost lives. We have billions on the way to more in the hole for, this war, which we now know how it ended up. It started to smell fishy early. You're sitting in the room with Darth Vader himself. But you're there. Hang on, let me just understand your capacity there. You're still working for the PR firm?
I was still working for Edelman.
Yes.
Yeah. So Edelman, as I said, is the largest independently owned public relations firm in the world.
Yes.
And they have done, in the time that agency's existed, some incredible things. They do a thing called the Edelman Trust Barometer, which is presented at the Davos World Expo every year.
Yeah, it's like the Easter show for countries and finance companies.
Correct. Yeah. Part of the business actually supported Hillary Rodham Clinton in one of her early runs into the centre. So it's an incredibly sophisticated and I would say globally active firm. And so what had happened is we had gathered as all of the country leaders in Washington for a meeting about how our business was going to proceed and what our priorities were. And actually, Osher, I'm going to share two stories with you because I actually think they're really, really relevant. The first of them was we had a session where all of our country heads were in this room, and Condoleezza Rice's chief of staff came to talk to us about how businesses were evolving across the Asia-Pacific region and into China and into India. And in that week prior to that, there had been a front cover article from the Times magazine basically predicting that by 2020, the American economy would be in decline and it would be the Indian and the Chinese economies that would be taking over the world.
I was living in America at the time. I remember the cover. I remember people like, what is this bullshit? And who are these people? And fuck them. Let's set every newsstand on fire. They wouldn't accept it as real.
Correct. So Condoleezza Rice's chief of staff comes into this meeting to tell us this is not real. This is not going to happen, because we were trying to expand our business into China at the time. So Edelman was having its own challenges about how do you do business in a country that just does not do business like you've done it everywhere else in the world. And we were exchanging ideas, exchanging thoughts. And anyway, at the end of it, one of my other country heads stood up and they said, look, what are you advocating here? And the chief of staff turned around and said, look, basically, it's going to be okay because we're going to teach China and India how to do business. So we are going to show them how to do business. So by 2020, they'll be doing business our way. And I kid you not, Osher, there was this moment where the head of our Indian operations stood up, very, very well-spoken Indian man, and he just looked this guy straight in the eye and he said, with all due respect, by 2020, if you're not doing business our way, you'll be out of business. And it was this real moment for me of reckoning that here is part of the world that didn't want to move, was not going to acknowledge that it may have to move. And here were these emerging countries that were saying, well, we don't care. You're either on this bus or you're off this bus. We're going to keep driving. So that was a really seminal moment for me because I got to see this very early insight into what is when a country gets into a position where it's unable to see outside itself. When you become the source inside the jar and you're not looking at the labelling from the outside, you can't evolve. Then the conversation then with Donald Rumsfeld actually happened because we went to the Pentagon and had a tour of the Pentagon and looked at, how it worked and that was all about how you get maximum efficiencies out of teams, speedy communication across divisions. And I happened to have the opportunity to sit and have a basically there were 4 or 5 of us, 4 country heads, one-on-one conversation with Donald Rumsfeld. And I did say to him, I don't understand, why are we there? Where's your evidence? And can we talk about why was it just so easily assumed by you as an American that we would follow? Help me. And I was asking not from a place of arrogance. I was sincerely wanting to understand what it was about the relationship between our 2 countries that made the Americans so certain that we would follow regardless of where they stepped. And yeah, it was a fascinating conversation. But at the heart of it, he called me out and said, "You must be Australian, because only an Australian would basically dare to challenge me in this way."
So I'm guessing this is 2005, 2006,
yes.
Right? So
yeah.
So they're 2 years in, and if you remember anything about the history of the second Iraq War, really, the second Gulf War, they were just pouring money and troops and weapons and firepower and destruction. They're doubling down and doubling down and doubling down on this myth we now understand that we have to go in because Saddam has weapons of mass destruction. And so he would have known when you asked him that it was all bullshit. And he would have known that there at that point had been hundreds, if not by then thousands, of American lives and thousands of Iraqi lives lost because of that lie. Far out. I can't believe that you looked him in the eye and asked him that.
Yeah, well, and I think it was, I never, so if we cut right to, I never saw myself being a politician, Osher. This has not been on my long-term, I don't know that I've had long-term career goals, but I didn't foresee this happening. So for me, I was sincerely, as I said, curious. I wanted to understand what was it about this dynamic that enabled this to happen. And I think I wanted to have an honest answer from him. I wanted him to just say, "We've gone in after the oil. It's all about what, actually, there's no weapons, but we really can't afford to not have really easy access to that. So we just want it." Or, "We've gone in because we created a monster and now we've realised we've got to put it down. It's not doing what we want it to do." And I couldn't get my head around the fact that it was so necessary to be so deceitful around what was really going on. And that basically, as a world, we were so willing to just take what we were being fed without questioning it.
I love that. Where you stood when you asked that question. I think that's really, really important. Yes, we are doing this thing. Yes, we're all committed to this thing. We're sitting in this room because of this thing. Out of genuine curiosity and trying to find a way that is possibly less destructive from here, can you answer this question for me? You're not trying to shoot him down. You're not trying to knock him off at the knees. You're just is there another way? Just a place of actually genuine curiosity for the betterment of everyone to not accept the way we've always done things, the way we'll always do things, actually knowing there might be a better way to do things. And it starts with answering this question. And I think that's an extraordinary place to stand as someone who's looking to represent the public and looking to be in a seat of parliament. And far out, man. I don't know if you saw any of the debate. Well, we're recording this the day after the religious freedom bill last night. We're yet to know how it ends up and what happens with it in the Senate. But the debate went on till 3, 4 in the morning. But if anyone's got any doubt that you can stand up there and have a good solid chat to the member from whatever, she stared down Donald Rumsfeld. She'll be fine. That's amazing. Yeah. That's just what a skill set. So I'd love to get back to the McGrath Foundation.
Yes.
So you're at the end of your mat leave. Your big job's on the way. Hey, kids, we're moving to New York. They can't imagine.
Going big smoke,
the
PR,
package. We're going first class. We're living in the company apartment. It's 2 blocks down from here. Kids are going to go to this school in Brooklyn. It's going to be this. It's going to be that. It's going to be this. It's going to be that. And then the phone call comes.
Yeah. So I was literally. Ironically, it was my daughter's christening the day that Jane passed away. So I literally came out of the church from my daughter's christening and had a message from a friend saying, Jane's passed. And I remember being quite shell-shocked because I knew she'd been unwell, but I think, like most Australians, I just think we believed she'd kick it, that she would beat it. And so, that was the first sort of 24 hours. The next morning, I actually was sitting on the edge of a swimming pool with my son, who was then, James must have been, I guess, 4 or 5. He was doing his swimming lesson, and my phone rang, and it was a lady called Kylea Tink, who had only relatively recently been employed by the foundation to start to help them build what a breast care nurse program might look like. And it was only her in the office. And she rang me and said, look, I've been told that if I needed any help, I should call you and you'd tell me what to do. And this is what's happening. The phones are going crazy. Channel 7's here, Channel 9's here. This, what do I do? And I said to her, okay, so what we need to do, write a statement, put it up on the website, divert your phones, and these are and I sort of was sitting on the edge of the pool kind of going, I need to help, but this is, I have to be respectful about how I help. Anyway, so I hung up. She said, right, got it. Statement, phones, bank accounts, got it. And then literally we hung up, and 10 minutes later she rang me back and goes, what did you say I'm writing? What's that thing I've got to write? And I just said to her, I said, right, okay, put the phones to the answering service. I'll be there in half an hour and we'll get through this together. Whipped my son out of the pool, rang a girlfriend, ended up leaving my 3 kids with my girlfriend for about 5 days. And I went into the foundation and just helped the team get through Jane's funeral. She died on a Sunday and the funeral was on the Wednesday, so it was a really tight turnaround. And then Tracy Bevan, who was also working at the foundation at the time, went to the UK. She flew out to the UK on the Wednesday afternoon and had some time over there with her grief. And Glenn packed up his kids and went out west to his family's farm out the other side of Burke. And so I just stayed in situ to kind of help this tiny organisation. At the time, Osher, they didn't have networked computers. And we were getting, I think the day after Jane died, over $1.5 million was donated to the foundation in the space of 24 hours, which was phenomenal.
Yeah.
But brought with it a whole heap of, well, how's this being receipted? Where's it going? Because we've got to suddenly, all this accountability comes with it. So 6 weeks later, Glenn came back, Tracy came back. And by that stage, I think even though I'd been asked to be there previously and I'd said no, spending that 6 weeks right at the coalface, I developed this intense sense that I had to try and do what Jane had set about to do. What the idea she'd had was a good one, that families would benefit from access to a breast care nurse, that she'd had the courage and the capacity during her whole heartbreaking experience to recognise that within her experience there was an opportunity to help others. And honestly, I think it probably was an expression of grief for me that I wanted to see what she had started actually get done and become successful. So, yeah, I signed on at the McGrath Foundation as CEO. I actually started on my birthday, the 5th of September. I drove out to Mudgee for my first official function and spoke at this fundraising event and felt like for the first time I gave voice to what, Jane had wanted to create. We had 3 McGrath breast care nurses at the time. 6 years later, when I left, we had 100 McGrath breast care nurses spread right across the country, supporting over 25,000 families. And every day I turned up in that job, I turned up because I knew that this was a moment in time when people were coming together to fundamentally change our healthcare system in Australia.
Which is no easy feat to suddenly bring in this. When you get to the pen, I don't know, nobody pushes a pen anymore. When you get to the spreadsheet wizards at the top floor of any kind of healthcare organisation, be it a hospital or an insurance company or whatever, there'll be a line item on the spreadsheet. We're like, what? Hang on, that wasn't there last year. Why do we now need more of these people? How do you try to convince at the end of the day, a specialised breast care nurse is a highly skilled, highly trained, I'd like to think well-paid person, and paid because they make great a great difference in people's lives and the lives of their families, of the people they're treating. How do you then try to convince the spreadsheet gatekeepers in these institutions that it's worth the investment?
It was really, really tough. I'm not going to lie, because I think, this was also one of the first cases where a significant amount of federal funding was subsequently secured to roll out a health service program where health services are traditionally controlled and delivered by state governments. So I think what it took from our perspective is at the federal level, we worked very hard to build bipartisan consensus around the value that something like this could create in the community. So we ended up in a situation where both of the major parties at the time had committed to funding us to roll this program out. And then literally when it came to getting those nurses on the ground in the communities, it was a day-by-day battle, because we'd ring an area health service and say, look, we've identified you have the population demographics that show that you have a high rate of breast cancer within your communities and a breast care nurse could help here. And the hospital would say, well, no, we don't need a nurse. We need a mammogram machine, or we need a radiography machine. So, yeah, we'll take your money, but we're going to put it into the machine. And then we'd have to go, well, no, you're not getting the money. Like, the money comes with the nurse, or there is no money. And so those first 32 nurses that rolled out in the year after Jane passed away, every single one of them was a fight. Like, it really was no, this is the ground we're holding. This is the ground we're pursuing. These are the people we want to see employed. And I think it was, and then actually at the end of that 3 years of funding, the government tried to withdraw the funding, because what we hadn't read in the fine print is that it was a one-off grant. And so I ended up finding myself in the office of the then health
Hang on, did
minister.
you say 3 years? What's the election cycle in our country
Yeah,
again?
exactly.
Oh, that's right, it's 3 years.
3 years, yeah. And so I got
I'm so cynical about this stuff, Kylie. It just, it makes my colon twitch, I swear.
Well, you know what, I think you have reason to be, Osher, because, and this is why I think I do have, while I haven't been a politician, I have very clear perspective on how our political system works.
You've been a politician since you started working at the PR company, because at a PR company, you are pitching your idea to either a newspaper that is leaning this way or that way, generally centrist, or leaning to the right, left one, right. So you're pitching your idea to a politically skewed editor. All right, you're trying to get your story into their paper, into the valuable first pages of it. So you're in with the politics there. You're in with the politics in if you don't get to be an international, a candidate for an international head of an office at a global PR firm without being good at dealing with politics in a high stakes, high tension, high reward office environment. The politics you've had to do when talking to Donald Rumsfeld, the politics trying to get people over the line with local healthcare providers. You'd been a politician this whole time. You just haven't been, you just don't have MP at the end of your name.
Oh my gosh, I'm never going to be able to look at myself in the same way. I think, it's interesting you say that, because actually I fundamentally see myself, if you had to put a label on me, I'd say what I am is I'm a restless advocate, for me, I simply, to say to me, and I would say for the first year or so, 2 years at the McGrath Foundation, the most common phrase I heard was, you can't do that. It won't work that way. No, that's not possible. They were the three things that people kept saying to me. And I just kept turning up going, why not? Why is that not possible? Why can't we have nurses in area health services across the country in pink shirts so that people can build a connection with that community?
Amazing branding. Honestly, it's freaking incredible branding.
It is.
Unbelievable branding.
Yeah, and it became, but it's unbelievable branding because it's come to stand for something so much bigger than what it actually is.
You made the meaning connection very, very quickly, right? In those first 6 weeks, you did it. And that's still to this day, 15 years later, it's still there. It's huge. Yeah.
Well, and I think, so if I just come back, so the story about the end of and you're right, you need to be cynical in politics. And I think I would say this to Australians even today, beware the politician who comes out making promises in the lead up to an election, because 9 out of 10 of those promises are going to be offered as some sort of sweetener to get your vote. And, that's where we are in this country at the moment. And, we only have to look at, you mentioned the religious discrimination bill that's been debated overnight in the House of Reps. I'm angry this morning that, our Prime Minister says that legislation has to be passed because he promised it. So he's corralled his party room and said, we promised we'd get this through. We have to get this through. My response to that is, what about all the other promises? What about the Federal Integrity Commission? What about the $63 million you promised for cystic fibrosis research that hasn't turned up? What about faster action on climate? What about better treatment of women? All those things have just been ditched, but this one thing is the thing that he's held our parliament back till 5 a.m. in the morning debating. And I'm like, who are you kidding? This is... So, sorry, it's a bit tangential, but it comes back to me. I agree with you. I think beware politicians who, come bearing gifts in the lead up to an election. In our case at the McGrath Foundation, sure enough, as it came to the end of the 3 years, the government wanted to remove the funding, and I got summoned to a meeting with the then Health Minister, a gentleman by the name of Peter Dutton, at Macquarie Street. And I was told our funding would not be renewed, that the funding was being moved into other areas.
What's it like? What's he like in the room? Are you taller than him?
No, he's tall. He's tall.
He strikes me as he's old school Queensland Police when you had to be 6'4" or something. He's big.
Yeah. A lot of the men involved in politics at the moment at the federal level are tall. The gentleman I'm running against in the seat here, Trent Zimmerman, Trent's tall.
But what's it like when you meet Peter Dutton? What's he like in the room?
So I would describe Peter Dutton as someone who's incredibly composed. So, I've had lots of meetings with lots of politicians in my life, but walking into a room to meet Peter was a very calm room. There was a very strong sense of what each person in the room was there to do. He wasn't at all flippant. He was very direct in the way he communicates. And he did not hesitate. There was no beating around the bush. He didn't try and make me feel good about it or anything else. He just came straight to the point and said that the funding would be removed from the McGrath Foundation, that breast cancer had enough and the money needed to go elsewhere. And so I obviously went in to bat for the foundation and talked about, what we've been able to do, the number of nurses that were out there, the families that were being supported. But at the time, it seemed to me that he had made up his mind that no, not for any reason, not based on any advice he'd received from a health department or anybody else externally. It was just that in his role, in this capacity as this minister, this was the decision he wanted to make. And so we got to the end of the conversation, Osher, and I don't know what came over me, but I turned to him and I said, well, okay, thank you for your time today. And I looked at his staffer and I said, look, if you can please let me know where we should send the names of all of the CEOs for the area health services that you'll be pulling this funding from, and where you would like me to provide you for the contact details for all of those local papers and those local news agencies so that you can reach out to them and let them know that you're pulling the funding. I'm very happy to supply you with that list. And the room just went silent. And Minister Dutton looked at me and he said, no, you can't do that. And I said, I beg your pardon? He said, well, you're the ones, you're taking the nurses out. And I was like, no, but it's your funding, Minister. It's your funding. So you can let the communities know you're pulling your funding. And needless to say, by the end of the meeting, the funding had been resecured for another 3 years for the McGrath Foundation. So it kind of...
just so you know, I've had to take my feet off the floor because I'm doing that little leggy kick that my little Wolfie does when I tell him that, we're going to go on the bike and have an adventure. The whole time you told me that, I'm doing air kicks in the air. I'm just so gleefully excited that you... So, wow, what a move. Were you standing up? Was this the end of the meeting? You standing up? This is the goodbye?
This was actually. So then, what was particularly funny is we didn't stand up. We were sitting opposite each other,
wow.
And I guess it was power sitting, it's upright backs, it's expanded chests. And I wasn't aggressive.
No.
I was just held my space. But what was funny is when the meeting came to an end, as we stood up and he shook my hand, and I think there was sincere respect from him to me at that point in time. And he actually said to me, "Do you ever do Q&A?" And I was like, "I beg your pardon?" And he said, "Do you ever do Q&A on the ABC?" And I said, "Oh, no, I'm too busy working." And he goes, "Good." And I was like, "I beg your pardon?" He said, "I don't ever want to come up against you on that show." And I was like, oh. Boom, and walked out and had a good laugh. But to me, my experience in that political frame is that you do have to be able to call stuff out and stand toe to toe and be prepared to fight for what you believe in. And you may not always win. I mean, I'm fortunate that to date, everything I've kind of turned my hand to, we actually have ended up winning in one, some way, shape or fashion. But, who knows what will happen in the future.
I didn't think it could be better than the Rumsfeld story, but it just got better. And I'm sure there's more to come. My God, this is the best. This is the best. I'm so excited. So you're running as the independent candidate for North Sydney, which is I'm sure there's these sorts of seats all over the country. It's like this is a Liberal seat. That's what it is. It's a Liberal seat, dyed in the wall. It's been, just the way that the generations work and people who live and move and stay in the area through generational transfer of wealth, etc. It's always been that seat. That you've said publicly that the Mr. Zimmerman, the Liberal Party candidate, claims to speak for the people of North Sydney. As a person from North Sydney, you don't believe that they do reflect the values of the community. How have the values of the community, what's changed? Has the values of the party changed or the values of the community changed?
So I think, you're right, Osher. So the North Sydney seat's been around for about 100 years and for all but 6 of those years, it's been held by the Liberal Party.
It's a pretty good batting average.
It's a pretty good batting average. In the 6 years that it wasn't held by the Liberal Party, interestingly, it was held by an independent, an amazing man called Ted Mack, who is pretty much regarded as the father of independence and was renowned for integrity and, community advocacy. To answer your question, I actually do think it's the political system that has changed fundamentally. And I think it's probably like, you've no doubt heard the story about the frog in the pot of water. If you put a frog in a cold pot of water and turn the heat up under it slowly, it won't jump out. It will actually end up boiling to death because it doesn't realise the environment around it has changed.
But if he jumps into a boiling pot, he'll jump straight out.
Jump straight back out, yeah. In our case, I think that our political system has been drifting over a number of years now, and we are just now hitting that point where the water around ourselves as a community and the way our politicians are behaving, it's at boiling point.
And it's an amazing metaphor because the death of amphibians is one of the most terrifying red flags caused by the warming planet and the warming water in our, how are you fishing kingfish in Tasmania? Why are there tropical starfish on Stradbroke Island? Why? Hang on, they're halfway down the Central Coast. This, it's amazing and frightful, but yes, it's great. So the party, we're just starting to, the bubbles are starting to form on the sides of the pot. Is that what's happening?
Yeah. And I think that there is this real moment in time. To me, what is fundamentally failing our society is that somehow, and I'm responsible for this, Osher, you're responsible for this, anybody who's been of a voting age in the last, in my case, 32 years, we've enabled this system to create itself. And the system is structured in a way that there are 2 major parties who have no interest in working together to come to the best possible solutions for our country. Their only interest is in either winning or losing. It's very combative in Canberra at the moment. And I don't know if it's always been like that, but I think definitely in this last 6 years, we've seen it more often than not. That really sensible, you look at Zali Steggall's climate bills, for example. They were really good. That's really good proposed legislative reform. It's been created by an independent who has no vested interest in either party. Her focus is on the community in our country. She took it to them ready-made, yet because it wasn't a Liberal Party idea or a Labor Party idea, they didn't let it through the House. Same with Helen Haynes's Integrity Commission work. I mean, that legislation is extraordinary. It is best in class globally. She had the best minds in our country work on that. She took that legislative proposal to the House, but because it wasn't a Liberal idea or a Labor idea, it didn't get the traction. And that has got to stop. I mean, I fundamentally believe politics is about the people. And when the Constitution of Australia was first written, there were no political parties. The Constitution of Australia was created to enable all communities to send a representative from themselves to a common meeting place to then discuss what was most important to the country and form a consensus around which way we wanted to go. Over time, parties have drifted into it. Someone asked me last night, why did I think parties came to be? I think they probably did come to be to make life a bit easier for people. Not everybody wanted to read every piece of legislation. So if you find someone you tend to agree with, well, you read that one, I'll read the next one. And that was fine for a while because you still had discourse and you still had discussion. But this last 6 years of politics, there's been no constructive discourse or discussion between those two major parties. And we need to stand up right now and say, you are not behaving in a way that befits our nation. These are not the conversations we want to see had in this chamber and in this building on our behalf. And therefore, we're stepping back into the conversation. You can step back now. Thank you, but time for you to step back.
You mentioned two really powerful bills from, I'm happy to say, two previous guests of this podcast. You've mentioned two really powerful bills there. And when was the last time we actually saw integrity at the top level of Australian politics? And why do we need now, in a week that we've seen Grace Tame and Brittany Higgins front the National Press Club devastatingly brilliantly, why now is integrity the number one thing that our country needs to focus on?
Federal politics, for a really long time, I probably have been in that group of Australians who kind of thought as long as the job was getting done, I could make the rest happen around the outside of it. So I probably haven't looked at that issue of integrity. Like, I think the question I asked, I often say to people, when was the last time you felt inspired by our leaders? What were the moments that have inspired you to be bigger and better? And I actually don't know that I have. I mean, obviously there are moments, like I think Julia Gillard's misogyny speech was every person, every woman in the country stood up and fist pumped behind that. But in terms of actual legislative reform and feeling like we're moving on really big, important things, maybe the NDIS, that was a really big, important thing. I think when we did see that reform where there was a carbon price introduced into Australia, we are the only, and you would know this better than me, we're the only nation in the world to wind back a carbon tax. It was working. For the very short period of time it was in,
Number one.
So, I think, it's definitely not been there definitely in this last 6 years, it has just failed to materialise. And I think for me, it's probably easier, maybe this is the negativity bias, it's easier for me to identify those moments that really made me feel its lack of presence.
Yeah.
And that was things like Christian Porter's blind trust and the fact that when, they tried to refer him to the Privileges Committee, the party blocked the referral. So he didn't even get referred to the Privileges Committee. I think it's things like when you have a state premier, regardless of what you think of, Premier Berejiklian and all the great stuff she did, for her to be able to come out and without even blinking go, pork barreling's just part of the system, everybody does it. It really, they're the moments that I think for me kind of made me go, hang on. I knew it was not great, but in the business world, that stuff would not be accepted. You'd be fired, you'd be dismissed, you'd be...
And that's the thing. I remember when there were stories of a particular party leader turning up drunk to work. If I turned up drunk to work it would be, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to The Masked Singer. I'm Dan McPherson. That'd be it. It'd be over. It'd be like a click of a finger, and the next episode would be somebody else. That would be it. If you did ask about, and I just don't want to alienate people here. I want to be sure that we're talking about what's in our hearts as a nation. All right. You asked about what was the last time you felt inspired, and I talk about this all the time. And that when I think about, and as much as I disagree with so many policies of that government, John Howard taking guns off the street of our nation was one of the greatest things that ever happened. You look at our refugee clusterfuck at the moment, and the aforementioned Peter Dutton's involvement, and the money that we're wasting on imprisoning children. It was the Liberal Party that saved thousands of Vietnamese refugees in the 70s. Thousands. We airlifted them to safety and born a community and enriched our country with thoughts and ideas and food and culture. And like the Liberal Party in Australia has a history of doing colossal things still
true
affect
leadership,
us.
statesmanship.
True moments like that really are they're possible by both parties. You mentioned the NDIS. It's kind of in the independent realm. The NDIS thing came across the line. It was independent senators that helped craft that and got it over the line. And so the role of independence is so vitally important in our as we move forward. When it comes to climate, I mean, a Liberal Party in Australia, this is for people listening overseas, not Liberal, not American Liberal. It's small business, it's growth, it's jobs and growth. What role, we're not idiots. When we see the climate projections and the impacts upon our economies, upon our real estate prices, upon our insurance prices, what do the people of North Sydney, the electorate you're looking to represent, how do they feel about climate?
I think, so one of the most important things about running as an independent is that I am free to listen to the people who I'm seeking to represent, and the policies will be very much created from the ground up. And actually, what I found fascinating, Osher, is that there are so many incredible people across this community who are actually already working in the space of renewable and sustainable energy. And in fact, last Tuesday, I had a roundtable discussion with 25 CEOs and founders of businesses that are all directly working in renewable and sustainable energy, to understand from them what they need more of. And, resoundingly, the message that came back is that actually they're happy to do the work. Like, they love what they're doing. They believe in what they're doing. They know it can work, but they need the federal government to get out of the way in many ways.
Yeah, we're busy trying to make billions of dollars here. We're busy we are the Rockefellers inventing petrol distribution systems in the 1800s, and we're about to all go to the moon in Lambos powered by electricity. Can you please get out of the way?
Correct. Can you please stop subsidising old technology? Instead, back the startups. Where's the investment in the startup infrastructure here in Australia to really back these new businesses in? Yeah. What are we doing to make sure that stuff is developed here, stays here, and we become the global superpowers in the manufacturing of it and the exporting of it? I mean, that fundamentally the technology behind a solar cell was developed here by the University of New South Wales. Yet do we make solar panels in Australia? No. So it's kind of like we have the capacity to be a renewable energy superpower, but we need our federal government to send very clear signals to both our domestic market and our international market that that's the way we're moving. And that, we've done digging stuff out of the ground. We've dug enough. We can stop digging. We can phase it out. And as we phase it out, we bring in the next wave and everybody moves on to a new era of life.
Digging stuff out of the ground has given us the country we live in. And
100%.
I have grown up and benefited from the healthcare, the infrastructure, the education, the defence. These are all things that have been largely made possible by digging stuff out of the ground. When we say renewable energy superpower, what that really means, I know, I don't think I'm just saying something too far, is like, it means that the way we live stays kind of the way we live and might even get a whole lot better, all right? But digging stuff out of the ground will not be here in 10 years the way it is right now. And if we're not ready, the health, the education, the transport, the defense, like all those things will suffer. And that's the thing, I think that's the line that people don't really put together. That the world, as you mentioned, the world has already flicked the switch. They're already moving. Yeah. And if we're not moving with it, we are Venezuela. And as I have great Venezuelan friends. I don't want to end up there. I don't want to take a weapon to get my groceries.
No, and I think actually, that's a really important point, because I think in prior elections, like we've seen the last few elections, people have said, it's going to be about climate, it's going to be about climate. But at the end of the day, it hasn't been climate that's kicked over the votes. There's then been an issue about a sense of loss of security or, economic failure or tax reform.
My franking credits, Kylie. My franking credits.
Exactly.
Who's Frank? Yeah.
But I think what's really interesting for me about the debate we're having this time, Osher, is that this is not a debate, even though it should be, and it should be enough, this is not just a debate about what we need as a healthy climate and environment anymore. This is also a debate about what we need as a healthy economy and a country. And I think that's the big switch that's been flicked this time, is people are actually prepared to say, from an economic point of view, I'm not happy for us to continue to rely on this as a strategy. And, I'm a pretty big thinker. And I actually lament the role that we are continuing to play. And you hear it all the time, we're not such big emitters, we're not really part of the problem. We're the third largest exporter of fossil fuels on the planet. So if we export it and somebody else burns it or uses it, aren't we partially responsible for the creation of those emissions?
I just manufacture the weapons, I don't shoot them.
Yeah. And so I think and the thing that, the lost opportunity in that to me is that if we already have that much influence in those countries and we have those relationships and we know the capacity they're trying to build, why wouldn't we be working with them to hothouse them, to help them completely step over fossil fuels and go straight to clean energy sources? Why make them drag through, the 30 or 50 years that we have? And as you said, Coonabarabran, there's lots of my friends who work in the mines who have had great careers through it, towns that, have really relied. The Pilliga is an area where they're still looking at, trying to get gas out of the ground. So I understand it is very real. The economic benefit to regional and rural communities of that particular sector is very real. And that's why I think we need to face up to it, as it needs to be a transition. We can't just stop and start something, but we can't transition unless we've got a very clear plan. So what's the plan? And this whole talk of net zero by 2050, we cannot fall for that. That's 10 elections away. The people telling us that may not even be here. So to me, the question is, what are we doing by 2025? What are we doing by 2028? What are we doing by 2031? What are we doing by 2035? And let's actually break this down and as a community work together to re-gear ourselves. And I think that's super exciting.
One of my favourite quotes from you is, you've said that the government is protecting the VHS economy while the rest of the world has moved to live streaming. This was in reference to energy policy. My eldest might have seen a VHS tape at some point in her life. She might remember DVDs, but her life, she doesn't understand, everything is there when she wants to watch it.
Yeah. Osher, this is the funny story on that is that actually that was, something that just came, I love to tell stories in ways that people can hopefully understand it by simplifying it.
You might have to go into a career in marketing, Kylea. I think you might have... You might have a role in PR. I don't know. Just think I've got an idea.
Well, and I offer this because I just think it's important that we are able to laugh at ourselves. The first time I used that phrase, I actually got a call from someone who is helping me kind of make sure that I keep communicating in a way that makes sense. And his comment to me was, "Oh my God, Kylie, He said, most of the young voters won't even know what you're talking about. He said, I'm going to have to go and ask my daughter if she knows what a VHS is. And I was like, well, if they don't know, they'll know now. So that's
it's a really great analogy. A similar thing was like you're trying to be sure that CD manufacturing continues in this country, and it's like, why? I stream everything. Like then the world has moved away, and it's landfill now. Forget it. And that's unfortunately, as we talked earlier, like there's these systems, these ancient systems that still exist because no one's questioned them. No one's looked them in the eye and gone, yes, this is the way it's always been done. Does that mean it's the best thing for us to do from here? And that takes leadership, and it takes a brave person to ask those questions. One of the things that I get doing this show, and I've been doing this show for like 8 years now, I speak to people who I'm like, my God, if only you would run for politics. And either I ask them on the show or off the show, and the general response is like, I don't want my life destroyed. Like, often I feel that this is a system, as you mentioned, this is a system that is largely populated by ex-students of Sydney Boys High or, one or two particular universities in the country. They're all white, they're all men, and, they all have known each other since high school. And, if you're not part of that team, you get destroyed in public. And some of the best leaders in that country, the greatest leaders, would never go near politics because of what it does to them, their family, their ability to ever, be effective. A high profile version of this would be what happened with Peter Garrett. Why? Why have you gone, I know what it takes. I know what's at stake. I know what this will do to me and my family. Why have you gone, yep, I'm going to run?
Because we have to. The bottom line is, I accept the role that I've played in enabling this system to become a reality. So I accept my responsibility around that. But in accepting that, what I also do is give myself permission to say I'm not happy with how it is, and if I'm not happy, I need to step up and say this can be done differently. Let's work to make this a different outcome. Someone asked me last night at a community event, Osher, if I was frightened, like if I was, well, and I don't think they used the word frightened. I think they used the word, it's scared. Does it scare you, the thought of going to Canberra and trying to get stuff done? And my response to that was, I'm only human. And I didn't foresee this for myself. I didn't aspire. I would never have woken up in a morning. It would never have happened in my life that I would wake up one morning and go, I'm going to run for politics. I'm going to be a federal parliamentarian. But what's worked for me here is that, like so much of the other stuff I've done and I know has achieved extraordinary results, there is a group of people across this community who believe things can be done better and that we have the power to do that. They asked me to run with them. They asked me to step up and speak for them. And so while I am the person out the front on this is very much a community push to say we are done being treated like this when it comes to, our political vote. The North Sydney vote in the last 12 months was used to block Zali Steggall's climate bills. It was used to block the referral of Christian Porter to the Privileges Committee. It was used to block debate around Helen's integrity bills. If you took those three decisions out to the community and said to them, here's our vote, which way do you want to cast it? I can guarantee you that the people of North Sydney would have said, let the climate bills be debated. Absolutely, Christian Porter should face the music. Let the integrity bills be debated. And that's the voice I'm trying to bring back here. And I don't know where it's going to go, Osher. I really don't. I don't have... I know there's an end date that there'll be an election, and I understand that for so many people, the proof of whether this has been a success or not will be in whether I make it to Canberra. And don't get me wrong, I want to go to Canberra. This is very much a job that I want to do. But to be completely honest with you, I think every day we turn up and provide an opportunity for people to discuss what's going on in that level and put a little bit of pressure around, it's a win. We're already winning. Morrison went to Glasgow. He was not going to go. The Liberal National Party adopted net zero by 2050. They were not going to adopt net zero by 2050. we've seen Liberals in the last 6 months cross the floor. Bridget Archer stepped up and started crossing the floor. We are winning already. And to me, that's so exciting, because if that's what we can do from on the edges of the system, imagine how much more constructive and progressive our way of doing government is going to be, with a stronger, bigger, sensible crossbench to bring those two parties back into the table to have a discussion.
It's incredible hearing you frame the parliamentary votes in the voice of the actual person walking down the street in Neutral Bay, right? And I just never thought of it like that before. Our current member, Dave Sharma, he crossed the floor last night, putting protections for transgender kids in... I still don't... As far as religious discrimination goes, okay, I disagree with until quite our Prime Minister, I disagree with the premise of the question. I disagree that we even need this bill. Anyway, because if I think he knows, he's had his voting on climate, etc., is another story. But I think he knows that if he were to walk down the street in his electorate and say, I voted to bully transgender kids, the people in his electorate will be like, you what? Pardon? Because that's not representative of us as a community. And to think about how your local parliamentarian has voted in your name and what that vote did, if their vote was the one that, or one of the few that got them over the line, if that's not how you feel about the world, think about where your vote goes next time. And that is a huge, huge, huge message, Kylie. And I'm so grateful that you talked about that. You talked about your kids a few times, and I wanted to just kind of reflect. You mentioned, you said, I want to get back to Canberra, and I'm thinking, it's because you did have a really good first year there. Just remember what happened in your first year there last time, okay? Just remember. Try to keep a lid on it. Sure, party, important, but, remember what happened last time. When you think about, at what point in your motherhood journey did you go, holy shit, my mum did this when she was 18? Oh my God, how? And Dad was 21. Well, what?
So after my first child was born, so as I said, my eldest son is now 19, one of the first things I did, so, I have this amazing experience, this whole pregnancy, this little creature has been created in some amazing way and put into my arms. And it seriously was within the first 6 hours of his life, Osher, I rang my mother and said, I'm sorry. And she said, what? And I said, I am just so sorry. I get it. I finally get how much you love me. And I was 31 at the time, 32, Osher. So I think that, it's all relative. And, you just mentioned my kids. Someone asked me last night, what do they think of what I'm doing? And my comment was, my children are without a doubt the most important thing I've ever done. And I'm incredibly proud of them. They are their own individual selves. They have their own stuff going on. They're not surprised by what I'm doing. When I told them I wanted to do it, I asked if they would, if they were okay if I did it. My son responded by, of course you're going to do it, Mum. That's what you do. You go and fight the fights that need to be fought. So, of course, we've got your back. But actually, my comment last night was, I think it will be when they themselves are 50, they've got their own teenagers, they're trying to keep a job going and, food in the fridge, and they're going to turn around and go, are you kidding me? Our mother went into federal politics at this stage in her life. And I think that's perspective, and that's how it should be. I don't want my kids to have to stand toe-to-toe with the system we're currently standing toe-to-toe with.
And you have one son, you have two daughters. We have one of each. We have a nearly 18-year-old daughter and a 2-and-a-bit-year-old son. Over the course of your career, from either when you were a senior at university and there were, freshmen, this is an American word, like first years coming in, or when you started at Edelman or, through McGrath, when young women came into your organisation and started working in your team as the new arrivals, what was there a lesson you said to them, and a constant lesson and a constant advice that you gave these young women on their first few weeks in?
Oh, man. There's so much attention at the moment being paid to the way that men and women work together, either side to side or within an organisational structure. And I think, for me, I did come through the commercial sector in the 90s and the early 2000s. And I think while I am incredibly grateful for my career, in hindsight, if it was happening now, there probably would have been very many circumstances where someone would have said, well, that's inappropriate. They shouldn't have spoken to you about that, or you shouldn't have had to make that compromise. So being able to mentor younger people as they come in to any working environment is something I love. I think my advice, whether they are male or female, has actually always been the same, which is do the best work that you can do within the capacity that you have to give, and the rest will take care of itself. And my other piece of advice, always employ people that are smarter than you, because they do well and you look, even stronger because of that. So I really think it is important we still have, and one of the issues that I'm very keen to help address or help our society address, we still have a disproportionate and skewed version of equality as it comes to our workplace and family raising. And I am really keen, if I'm given the opportunity to go to Canberra, I'm very keen to be a major voice in driving a conversation around, why don't we have 12 months of maternity leave that is shared by both parents? Dad should be able to take 6 months paid as well as mum can take 6 months paid. Why don't we have a system of early childhood education and care in this country that guarantees families access to that from the time their toddler is 12 months old and onwards, to ensure that whatever you need to do to be the best version of yourself, you're able to access that, that it's not childcare keeping women out of the workforce or holding families back. Because I do think, and maybe this is the other piece about me, Osher, I feel like we're at a moment in time in our society where we have an opportunity to actually mature as a nation. There are so many really big issues facing us. Who are we? What do we stand for? What do we want to stand for into the future? And if we can look at this moment in time and go, you know what? We're now prepared to say we're a nation that's actually 65,000 years old, and we're going to embrace everything that enables us to be. We are a nation that does believe in equality for all, and we're going to embrace everything that enables us to be. We are a nation that believes in innovation and not settling for status quo, and we're going to embrace everything that's going to be. To me, that's the role of a really strong, healthy federal government. Lead. Show us where we're going. Lead us. Provide us with some guide rails to get us there. Coordinate. So, where you can, find who's doing it best and then leverage it. Let's not all keep having to make the same mistakes. And then where necessary, provide funding to stimulate. And if that was what our federal government was doing, lead, coordinate, stimulate, I think we'd be a completely different country.
If I only lived in your part of the city. But I know people that do, and I'm so grateful that I had the chance to speak to you, because it's hard to not be cynical about Australian politics. It's hard to not be so beaten down by the constant amount of dead cats being thrown at you. Like, come on, stop jingling the car keys in front of the kids. There's things going on back here that we really, really, really need to talk about. I'm fuming that it took however many hours of the 8 sitting days left till August. If I had 8 days of work till August, I would not be able to afford my mortgage. But that's how many sitting days. I don't understand how that's even possible. But they wasted 14 hours on this. There's that many other things they could have spent talking about last night that really, really need to get done right now. but they spend all this time faffing around, and it really fucks me off. So to know that someone like you is willing to go in there, willing to lead in the way that you're talking about, but also know that when you get in, you're walking through the doors going, and if Dutton comes at me, I'm packing heat and he knows it.
I'm sure there's nothing that can't be settled over a cup of tea, Osher.
Kylie, you're the best. Thank you so much for making time in a very busy schedule. I'm so grateful I got a chance to speak to you today.
I'm so grateful I had a chance to speak to you, Osher. I love listening to your conversations. I always get so much out of them. And I just think, if the only thing that comes out of today's conversation is just one person stops and thinks about the reality that their vote is just as important as anybody else's vote in this country. So my 19-year-old son's vote is as important as the Prime Minister's vote. Use your vote. It is your superpower. Preferences are your superpower. Don't just give it away. It's incredibly valuable and create the country you want to be living in longer term.